I've got one point I want to make before. Just very
Yes,
quick.
of course. Go ahead.
It's just a continuation of
Yes.
your last question.
Yes, by all means, Lord Fowler.
Right. So just before we begin, I just would like to expand on I think almost your last question, which was about the perceived delay between 81 and 82 on BPL. And the reason for that was that we were considering the options for the scale of the building, what had to be done. And the reason I mention it was a significant decision that was taken was that we went for the most expensive option, which meant that we had full self-sufficiency. And so it was that process which actually delayed us at that time. But when I say delay, it was a necessary process of preparing any major project. Sorry.
And I think there are documents within the bundle which you've exhibited to your
Yes.
statement, which talk about what was happening in that period of time.
Yep.
There is a question that will be for the chair and for submission in due course as to whether things could have been done more quickly.
Yes. Thank you.
But as I understand it from your statement, you weren't directly involved in those discussions in any event.
No.
And if we then just pick matters up in your statement, so Shemik, if we could go back to Lord Fowler's statement. And go to page 41. No, in fact, sorry, if we just go to page 40. We can see, you say at paragraph 4.7, and having set out a number of the documents in some detail, that there's no indication from these documents that you were being involved at Secretary of State level. You say you would have known that the £17 million had already been agreed. The detail, including how the money would be spent, would, where ministerial input was required, be handled at PSH, so that's the Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for Health, and to an extent MSH, Minister of State for Health level.
Correct.
So if we then go to the next page, we can see at paragraph 4.10, we pick up the point in time in March 1982, so about 6 months into your post, where you start to have some direct involvement in matters relating to blood and blood products. We looked at the statement you gave on the 3rd of March 1982 before lunch. If I can then pick matters up with the document of the 12th of March that you then refer to in your statement, it's DHSC 302309_009. And before we look at this, Lord Fowler, the purpose of this is really just to get an understanding of what was coming to you as a matter of fact as Secretary of State and what was not. So this is a minute from Sir Kenneth Stowe, dated the 12th of March 1982, the date's on the second page, and you've identified this as being a brief submission that you received. It refers to an attached clutch of papers. We don't necessarily have all of those. Relate to our concern over what may emerge by way of a further scandal at Edgware, and B, our response, irrespective of what actually emerges in the media and what we say about that, to evident deficiencies in management and control. And then we can see that this is directed to you. In my view, the Secretary of State, fortunately, is in a position to act now on B, so that's responding to deficiencies in management and control, and I would advise that he do so forthwith by deciding and announcing at the right time his decision to set up a new direct management structure for the 3 central blood laboratories with the status of a special health authority as proposed by Mr. Finsberg. And then the next course of action is endorsing and announcing at the right time the action now in hand to review the standards of operation of the regional blood transfusion service, and then reference is made to an attached note, a review of the control system of the National Blood Transfusion Service. And then if we go over the page, the third course of action that you're asked to consider is preparing a statement for Parliament or press, which would need to be drafted now, and would express the Secretary of State's concern, announce the measures, and encourage continuing blood donation from the public. So that's the Permanent Secretary directly engaging you with the issue. If we just go back to the first page, do you have any recollection of what was being referred to by way of the possible further scandal at Edgware?
No, I don't. That comes as rather a surprise. I don't think this was, in fact, copied to me, was it?
This submission was sent to you.
Was it?
Well,
Oh, I see. Mr. Clark. Sorry, yeah, two Mr. Clarks. Yes, absolutely. I'm with you. Yes. He was my head of my private office, wasn't he?
yes.
Yeah, right, got it.
Now, so this is 12th of March, and you're being asked to, 12th of March 1982, you're being asked to become involved in this issue. I just want to just show you a couple of further documents just to see how this, or why this might have been a matter that came to your attention. So DHSC 0003727_009. We can see this is a minute dated the 9th of March 1982, so it's a few days before Sir Kenneth Stowe's minute to you, or submission to you. Again from Mr. Clark in your private office. It says the title is Management of Central Blood Laboratories. I attach recent papers on this subject. The Secretary of State would be grateful if Sir Kenneth would consider the issues here in relation to other current problems on blood and blood products. Again, we haven't necessarily tracked down all the associated papers, but
but enough.
It looks as though the issue about the National Heart Hospital scandal having come to your attention in early March, you're now taking an issue in the management of the
yes, it was the Edgware bit which rather confused me, but which is, I suppose, part of it. But yes, I understand.
So you asked Sir Kenneth for advice.
Yeah.
He responded on the 12th of March 1982 with advice in relation to, amongst other things, the new management structure for the Central Blood Authorities. And then if we go to DHSC 0003727_004, so this is another minute from Mr. Clark in your private office. This is the 15th of March. And it says the Secretary of State is content for Sir Kenneth to proceed as proposed in his minute of the 12th of March. The Secretary of State would like advice on timing together with a report on the state of play as soon as possible.
That's quite a speedy response.
Yes, so you've responded quickly to Sir Kenneth, and it would appear that you want matters to be...
Exactly.
You want to be kept updated and to be kept updated speedily. Is that right?
Yep.
Now, the just two further documents in terms from this same month in terms of some of the background to the issue of the management of the Central Blood Authorities. And the next two documents are documents that I think you probably wouldn't have seen, or you might not have seen, it's not clear. The first is DHSC 303727_007. And this is a minute from Mr. Nodder to Sir Kenneth. So it might then have been forwarded to you, but as I say, it's not clear. It's dated the 11th of March 1982, and it's clearly on the topic of the management of the Central Blood Laboratories. And it says this: I've been trying in concert with Dr. Harris for nearly 12 months to obtain a ministerial decision on the management of the Central Blood Laboratories. We need a decision because the present arrangements for a shared management between the DHSS and the North Thames Regional Health Authority, through a committee chaired by Dr. Harris, are cumbersome and dangerous when we're embarking on the rebuilding of the main unit at a capital cost of £18 million or more, now agreed in principle by the Treasury. We go to the next paragraph. We've very fully examined options such as placing the laboratories under the Public Health Laboratory Service Board, or fully under the North West Thames Regional Health Authority, or under a specially constituted charitable trust. At the end of this consideration, we've concluded that only a small management body with the status of a special health authority will provide what's needed. Mr. Finsberg, who has, if I may say so, put in a lot of work on this, including visiting the main unit, has himself recommended this course. How does the recent trouble at National Heart and Edgware affect this? In my mind, it confirms two judgments. A, that the North West Thames Regional Health Authority doesn't provide a suitable body to be given additional management responsibilities at this time in the blood field. They do not want them anyway. B, that the department needs to get a firm management body in operation as soon as possible. If the Secretary of State agrees in principle to setting up a team with special health authority status, we will quickly make firm proposals for its composition and constitution. Now, if we just go back to the top of that document, you'll see there the reference to Mr. Nodder having been attempting to get a ministerial decision on the management of the Central Blood Laboratories for nearly 12 months. Are you able to cast any light as to why it had taken that period of time?
Not much. It took me 3 days. So I'm not quite sure why it took 12 months. Much of it, I think, must have gone back to the previous regime, and I suspect they went over it all again. That's what I guess would have happened. But I haven't really any kind of any complete explanation. But it enables me to say that I think the Special Health Authority was exactly the right thing to do. That's what Ken Stowe was advocating. I'm amazed if he had been advocating it before that anyone was ignoring that, because he was obviously the chief manager as far as GHSS was concerned. And it was a natural thing to do because it gave importance to this area and it singled it out as saying, look, it's not satisfactory to have these 3 separate units doing things. We want one doing it, and we want some good central management. And the argument, I think, is very persuadable. And as I say, I came to a very swift decision on that one. But as for the history, I cannot. I'm afraid I can't tell you, and I suspect there aren't too many papers either for that.
For the sake of completeness, I'm not going to take you to this further document, but I'm just going to give the reference for the record. There's a further minute from Dr. Harris to Sir Kenneth, same date, 11th of March, agreeing with Mr. Nodder, and the reference for you and for anyone else who wants to.
I think there was some dispute in the department, wasn't there, about whether a special health authority was the right thing to do. And it was rather, it seemed to me, rather theoretical one, reading the papers. But it seems to me the most obvious thing to do. You make it a particular area, a particular point, and you act on it, and that's what we did.
Yes, and you're right. There had been as it were, a dispute or consideration of different options within the department. The minute of the same date, sir, is DHSC 303727_006. But I'm not proposing to ask Lord Fowler specifically about that. And then just on around this same time, February 1982, the previous month, could we look at DHSC 0003727_019, please, Shomek? This is not entirely easy to read because it's handwritten. It's a minute dated the 15th of February 1982, and it's from Mr. Godfrey, and it's addressed to Mrs. Stockton Sol. It's asking for legal advice in any event about options for setting up a special health authority. If I can just draw your attention to perhaps paragraphs 2 and 3. So I'll read them out because they're not entirely easy to read. So could we just zoom in? Thank you. So the CBLs, the Central Blood Laboratories, comprise of the Blood Products Laboratory, Plasma Fractionation Laboratory, and the Blood Group Reference Laboratory. At present, they're managed temporarily by a joint management committee of DHSS and North West Thames Regional Health Authority. In the interests of efficiency, they need to be placed under commercial style management. A submission copy attached was put forward to ministers early last year, exploring several options. On balance, it suggested the creation of an SHA, so Special Health Authority. Ministers subsequently asked for advice on the proposal to establish a charitable trust to manage the labs. The decision was, however, postponed until Mr Finsberg had seen BPL at first hand. That visit took place on Friday, so that perhaps explains part of the delay. And then paragraph 3, following discussions with those primarily concerned at BPL and within DHSS, Mr Finsberg expressed considerable interest in bringing PFC Liberton, the Scottish plant, within the same management structure, and asked for urgent advice on how this might be done. He intends to discuss this with the Secretary of State and then his Scottish opposite number. Rather than delay the creation of a management board for the CBL, Central Blood Laboratories, while discussions with the Scots are in progress, ministers might prefer to establish a body capable of taking over PFC at a later date. We have been asked not to discuss this with SHHD, Scottish Home and Health Department officials, at this stage. Now, the purpose of drawing your attention to this, Lord Fowler, is really to ask whether you have any recollection of this issue being raised with you. It suggested Mr Finsberg might wish to discuss this with you and then with his Scottish counterpart. Do you recall this matter being taken forward with you?
Not at all, I'm afraid. I don't know if Geoffrey did discuss it with me. I rather doubt that he did, but it was 40 years ago. And no, I just don't have any recollection of that, it seems to me. Well, I think I wouldn't have been that impressed with the argument. It seems to me that what is being proposed here is that we should get a move on the things that we could do is a better and stronger argument than anything else.
We can take that down, thank you. So, having had this involvement then in March of 1982, just to complete the position in relation to your decision-making on the Special Health Authority, if we go to WITN 0771020, we can see an announcement on the 18th of May 1982 by you announcing the setting up of a Special Health Authority to run the Central Blood Laboratories at Elstree and Oxford. Now, it's around this time, May of 1980, so May of 1982, there may have been some further delay, arguably, between this announcement and the actual establishment of the Special Health Authority. Do you have any knowledge of that? There doesn't appear to be any documentation suggesting direct involvement.
No, I don't, I'm afraid. We are now dealing with stuff which is 40 years out, 40 years ago, I think.
Now, I just want to then move on, still on the topic of funding for BPL, but move on to May of 1983. And there's an article that you refer to in your witness statement. It's at DHSC 0002227_037. And if we go to the third page to start with, we can see the article, the date's given as 11th of May 1983, and it's in The Guardian. It's called Fowler's Blood Money. And then if we just pick it up, if we go to just slightly further up the page, please, Shomik. Anyone with a ha'porth of common sense can see that if you buy blood from people with nothing else to sell, there's going to be trouble. It's an appalling comment on the humanity of this government that they failed to ban the blood trade. Thus spake Reg Bird, ASTMS, that's the union official, and something of a wise Eric to Clive Jenkins' little urn, when he blew the whistle last week on the government's decision to cash limit, which means effectively to cut the funds of the Blood Products Laboratory, the only source of relatively safe British factor VIII for 4,500 haemophiliacs living in terror lest their next shot comes from a guy on the streets of San Francisco who's since succumbed to AIDS. 2 years ago, the Department of Health warned of the risks of hepatitis in US factor VIII. Jerry Vaughan, then Health Minister, agreed to pump 20 million into the Blood Products Laboratory with the aim of making Britain self-sufficient by 1985. Last year, according to David Bennett, an ASTMS official at the lab, was disastrous in production terms because of building work. This year was to be the year they started catching up. Then suddenly, 2 weeks ago, the authority which runs the lab told managers to cut their budgets by 10%. What had happened, it turned out, was that the authority had been told by the Department of Health that in line with all the other centrally funded agencies, they would only get a 5% rise this year. The authority knew that 5% was not enough to keep pace with rising medical equipment prices, let alone to start building production to meet a target of 100 million units of factor 8, as well as other blood products like albumin for burns victims by 1985. And then it says in the next paragraph, the government's commitment of getting Britain out of the US blood trade now looks decidedly half-hearted. And then it goes on to discuss issues relating to AIDS, which I'll come on to later. If we go back to the first page, there's a minute there from Mr. Parker to Mr. Godber in your private office, I think, dated the 11th of May 1983, which comments on that article and says in paragraph 2, the article gives a very misleading picture and explains why. Do you recall that article or it coming to your attention or what your response was?
I can't remember when my response to it was, but if you go on to, if you put the article up again, please. And you continue down to the second part of it. You will see here that I'm accused in the second part of the argument is that I am about to, haven't done so yet, but I'm about to, it is confidently said, I'm about to scrap the idea of generic unbranded drugs taking some of the, for common complaints, taking over from branded drugs. That is diametrically untrue. It is just untrue. I mean, I spent a vast amount of time, I know he's predicting, but his prediction is then diametrically untrue because I spent a vast amount of time actually persuading and the House of Commons and anyone else, the BMA, who were totally opposed to what I was doing, American producers who were totally opposed to what I was doing, to have generic substitution. And here is this man, Mr. Veitch, saying I'm opposed to it. Well, you can't expect me to take totally seriously a man who actually writes an article of this kind, has got half the article absolutely and completely wrong. So I'm sorry to be indignant, but I am indignant about this one. Secondly, I think that it is a political argument, it is a political article, it is around the time of an election, and he had, I forget what he says about Mrs. Thatcher, but that's also in the article somewhere. And even more crucial to your argument is that when it comes to revenue, we had given, there was a general cut of, I think, 5% for everyone. But when it comes to revenue, we had devoted not 5%, but something like 30% over the years to this CBL proposal. So I regard it as an unbalanced article, and above all, it's got its facts totally wrong.
If we go back,
I hope I make it myself clear.
I think so. If you go back to the first page and the minute from Mr. Parker, and just dealing with the point in relation to the CBLA budget, which is the point of more direct relevance to the inquiry, what's said there, and I think this is what you were alluding to in paragraphs 2 and 3, the 5% is correctly reported. What's said, and I don't think we have any further documents to cast any more light on it, is there's no reason at this early stage to think it will not be adequate for this purpose. And then paragraph 3
That's right, yes,
refers to the CBLA's allocations compared to other health authorities in recent years. Is that what you were referring to a moment?
Yes, so in the period 78-79 to 82-83, the growth in revenue allocation for the CBLA group has increased by 33.5% compared with 4.9% for other health authorities. So, you know, I don't think I can say any more about this article. I think it's not very, I don't mean helpful in a political way, but I think it isn't very helpful for anyone's understanding of what was taking place.
You say in your statement you think it's likely that this would have been drawn to your attention because of the terms in which
I imagine someone would have said, there's this article which is, I can't remember what's its headline.
Fowler's blood money.
Yeah, well, I think probably my press office would have said, oh, we must hear the Secretary of State this, and I'm sure they did. But whether I read it all with quite the same degree of indignation that I have now, I'm not sure.
Just then carrying through fairly briefly what later happened in relation to BPL. If we go to DHSC 0002239_088, we can see that March of 1984, you laid the foundation stone for the new works at the Blood Products Laboratory in Elstree. Sorry, if I can just see that. And so you're recorded as saying the decision to invest an estimated £24 million over the period of construction reaffirms this government's commitment to safeguard and develop this vital part of the country's health service. We believe, moreover, that this is a sound economic proposition in that the NHS will save annually many millions of pounds by not having to buy in vital products from abroad. This scheme is likely to pay for itself within perhaps 5 or 6 years of reaching full production. Now, I just wanted to ask you about the text of the speech you gave for the opening of or for the laying of the foundation stone. It is at HSOC 0020329. I think this quote is taken from that speech. So we can see this is a letter being sent to the Haemophilia Society by someone from the Central Blood Laboratories Authority, enclosing a copy of your speech. And if we go over the page, we can see it said, transcript of speech made by the Right Honourable Norman Fowler, Secretary of State and Minister of Health and Social Services, 23rd of March 1983. And then if we go to the text of it, I'm not going to go through all of it. You talk about the importance of blood and blood donation, the voluntary donation system in the first paragraph. And then you talk about the process of fractionation in the second paragraph. And then if we can go to the bottom paragraph on that page, you say this: basically, the government has decided that the United Kingdom should become self-sufficient in collecting and processing all blood and blood products needed for the National Health Service. This aim of self-sufficiency fulfills a recommendation of the World Health Organization that each country should collect and process all the blood and the blood products it needs. More importantly, self-sufficiency, as David Smart mentioned, will produce savings in the current National Health Service of spending in purchasing commercial products, which at the moment are mainly imported, and perhaps the most significant of these is factor 8, which is needed for the treatment of haemophilia. And then, before I ask you about that, if we go to the next page, there's then a description of what's proposed for the new building. At the end of the second paragraph on that page, you say, I'm pleased to say that the project is on time so far, with completion due by the end of 1985. And then the paragraph beginning, I think this decision to invest about £24 million over the period of the construction reaffirms this government's commitment to develop this vital part of the country's health service. We believe, moreover, that this is a sound economic proposition in that the health service will save annually many millions of pounds by not having to buy in vital products from abroad. The scheme is likely to pay for itself, etc. Now, the text of the speech would suggest that the primary factor, as far as you were concerned, in relation to the redevelopment of BPL was the saving of money to the NHS rather than the prevention of infection. Do you have any comments?
I wouldn't have said that was the case at all. I mean, these speeches, particularly on formal occasions, tend to be written by officials. I don't know who wrote this one. That certainly wasn't me. I mean, it's not that they've got the policy wrong, but the point that you make is the important point, that they seem to regard the financial argument as most important. It would have been a very easy mistake for a mistake of emphasis for an official to have made because at that time, you know, the whole government and the whole was talking about financial consequences and saving money. But in fact, I mean, obviously the most important thing is that it would be for the good of the public. I mean, it's not, it's a nice argument in support, but it is in support of the central policy that it is in the public good that we should have done that, not that we should simply save money.
Now, in the
and incidentally, the money's going up, isn't it? Each time we come to a new page, the money has gone northwards.
Which leads to the next issue I wanted to explore with you briefly, Lord Fowler. In around late 1984, there are various documents, you've set them out in detail in your witness statement, in which reference is made to the cost of the redevelopment is going to be more than had been originally identified and earmarked. And then there are Mr. Clark, as in the Minister of State for Health, gets involved, Sir Kenneth Stowe gets involved, there's concern about woeful lack of cost controls and so on. I'm not proposing to ask you to go through the detail of that, you've done so in your statement. My understanding is that for the most part, again, this was dealt with at junior ministerial level. You weren't involved in that issue.
Well, you say junior, I mean, Ken would have been dealing with this, and Ken Stowe hopefully would have been dealing with this as well. There was one quote in there saying that it came as a surprise to him. I'm not quite sure why it should have come as a surprise to Ken. So it was being dealt with week by week, certainly, and at a level that you would expect it to be. I mean, the significant thing is that it's really a public accounts question that you're raising, and I don't think they ever had an inquiry into this. But it's just not the expense and the cost. What was important was that in spite of that, we went on with the project. We didn't make any cuts in it. Various officials were saying, right, well, it's gone up in cost. We now must make a reduction. But what would a reduction have done? As I think it was Ed Harris pointed out, a reduction would only harm hemophiliacs and would only harm anybody else who was going to benefit by this policy. So we didn't, and we found the money from elsewhere in the budget. It's not wasn't the greatest position, because obviously if you find money from elsewhere in the budget, that part of the budget is also affected. But we put this particular issue very high.
And I think we can pick it up probably most conveniently from your witness statement. So if we could go back to the statement, please, Shomik. WITN 07710001. And if we go to page 67, in fact, no, if we just pick it up, page 66, so that we can see the dates.
Thank you.
So we can see halfway down there, there's reference to a comment from Ken Stowe, August 1986, where he says it's wrong for the department to hand over total responsibility for this project, a failure to apply the principle of accountability. We've then got Baroness Trumpington, who by this time has taken over as the responsible minister in the House of Lords. My view is that this has been badly handled. No commercial enterprise would have got into this situation. Management must be tightened up and a very tough line taken, and she expresses concern about delay. And then if we go over the page, we can see Barney Hayhoe, who is, I think, now your Minister of State, saying what a shambles, Secretary of State should be kept fully in the picture. Now, you've then described in paragraph 4.56 of your statement, you have a recollection of this matter being raised with you by Ken Stowe.
Yeah. I mean, before that, I should say that, I mean, I'm very grateful, obviously, for all this side comment from Barney Hayhoe and who was it?
Baroness Trumpington.
Baroness Trumpington. But I don't think it was very informed. I mean, Baroness Trumpington said, well, you know I can see that it's almost ready because the walls have gone up. Well, you know, there was little more to building that thing than actually just building the walls on it. I mean, no one was more irritated than me to see the cost going up. But the reason the costs were going up was because it was a very complex thing to do. And there were emerging necessities, emerging needs in that building itself. Ken Stowe came to see me about the BPL overspend. He didn't like it, I didn't like it, nobody liked it. And he came to see me for an informal one-to-one discussion. Why I remember that is that it was almost, I think it was unique for Ken to come in those terms. I mean, perhaps overstating it, we did have conversations obviously on other things, but unusual for a policy decision to be made on that basis. He was a stickler for proper procedure, and this really wasn't proper procedure, but it was the way it was done. His argument was that although there were obviously people in the department who were saying we should now cut back, I mean, how is that going to help anything? It wasn't going to help Hemophiliacs. It wasn't going to help anybody concerned with getting this project done. We could have our public accounts arguments, fine, but one needed to remember the end result and the end aim. And the end aim was to help the public. And that's what we did. And so we continued with the financing of the project to the end. And you can actually say, well, the cost at this year was this and the cost at that year was that. But what you should also take into account was that the net result, improved result for the public, was very, very substantial from that point to the next point.
And you've given the figures in the last few lines of that paragraph of your witness statement. You talk about there being a request for an increase from 38 million to 52 million, which was effectively granted, and then a further request because it was now said it was going to cost 60 million, and I think your statement says that was also, that funding was agreed.
Yeah, but it wasn't because the people were spending money as if it was going out of fashion and being extravagant. It was because new needs were being shown, and that is why the cost went up. What they could be accused of was underestimating at the beginning, understating perhaps at the beginning, not totally unusual in public contracts. People put in a low estimate and then you find it costs more than that. I'm not saying that was the case, but that has been the case in the past. But as I say, you're onto public accounts territory. The territory I'm on is health territory. And on health territory, the fact was that this project went through, and it was the first time for, since David Owen was talking about it in 1975, that it did go through. So, I mean, it was over a decade we'd been waiting for this, and we put it through, and that was to the benefit of the public and of patients and of the medical profession.
Now, can I then move away from BPL and just ask you a little about a separate issue in which you also had some involvement in the course of 1983. If we go to page 49 of your statement, paragraph 4.25, we can see there that in November of 1983, you were involved in announcing handling charges for the supply of private hospitals with blood and blood products. And if we just look briefly at that document, it's WITN 077110033, please, Shomik. Sorry, I might have written that down wrong. Hold on. Let's just... WITN 0771-033. Do you want to try that?
I've got it in front of me, haven't I? 425.
Yeah, no, I'm just going to get the underlying document.
Oh,
That's
sorry.
it. So this is November 1983, and
yeah.
you give an answer about the introduction of handling charges for blood supplied to private hospitals, saying it's always been the policy of the National Blood Transfusion Service to meet private hospitals' reasonable requests for blood and certain blood derivatives according to availability and clinical need. After consultation with representatives of the NHS, the private sector and the medical profession, I've decided that in keeping with the government's policy that economic charges should be made for NHS services offered on an agency basis, private hospitals will be required to meet in full the costs incurred by the blood transfusion service in supplying blood and blood derivatives. Now, I'm not going to ask you about the detail of that particular policy initiative, Lord Fowler, but again, it's trying to understand why this was an issue in which you as Secretary of State became involved. Are you able to assist in understanding why this came to you?
I imagine that there might have been some controversy about it. I mean, it's slightly ironic. I attacked for financing the private sector, and now I'm being attacked for not financing the private sector. So there's a certain unwinnability in this argument. But my very strong view was that at a time when we were being pressed for savings in every aspect of our work, if there were obvious areas where savings were possible, then we should take that. And this was an obvious area. We weren't saying that blood should be charged for by with the private sector, because blood had been donated freely. We were saying that for transport and for things of that kind, collecting, processing, handling, for that, then they should be charged for that, because there was no reason why we should subsidise the private sector in blood, and that's the point I was trying to get over. And we were looking for that's why we had the policy on generic substitution, which I'd just been referring to. That again was the reason for that, was that there was no reason why we should be paying fancy prices for drugs which we could get generically prescribed, particularly when they weren't the cutting edge of pharmaceuticals, to put it mildly. So we were looking for economies of this kind, and this is symbolic of it, not probably one of the biggest either.
Now, again, your statement explains, in terms of the background to this, that there'd been concern expressed over a period of time, 82, 83, about the possibility of there being private donor panels or companies seeking to import blood. And just want to, again, ask you to look at a couple of documents that came your way in that regard. If we start with WITN 0771037, this is a briefing, and we can see handwritten on the top, HS1A, so that's one of the health services divisions within the department, contribution to brief for Secretary of State's dinner with Lord Robbins / Dr. Balfour Lynn, 24th of May 1982. And then, I don't need to go through all of it, but we can see private hospital blood banks. Paragraph 1, we understand that the AMI group has experienced some difficulty in obtaining sufficient stocks of blood since it parted company with Dr. Mark Patterson following press reports about the misuse of blood at the National Heart Hospital. The group is concerned about the possibility of handling charges being introduced, and that's the decision you later made, that they would be. Lord Robbins may suggest that unless supplies improve and or if charges are introduced, the AMI group will set up its own private donor panel or will import blood, and there are various other documents which explore that issue. If we go over the page, look at that last main paragraph. If we pick it up 5 lines down, there's no doubt that a private donor panel, presumably offering payments to donors, could undermine the voluntary blood donation system in this country, and the Secretary of State may wish to take the opportunity to discourage AMI, which was the private hospital group. And then there's a reference to the possibility of the Minister of State for Health arranging a meeting. If we just go back to the top of the previous page, again, not really asking you about the detail of this, it's why matters were coming to your attention. It appears that you were being briefed on this particular issue because you were going to be attending a dinner with representatives of AMI. Is that the right way to understand this?
I would have thought so, yes. I can't say I have any memory of the dinner, but I mean, that would seem to be the most likely.
And then if we go to... sorry, forgive me when I find the reference.
I can't.
There's a later meeting that you have with the regional health authority chairs, and there's another briefing that I have not got the reference written down. Yes, actually, sorry, I think I might have found it. Yes. WITN 0771046. This is March 1984. We can see Secretary of State's meeting with RHA Chairman on the 21st of March 1984, presumably one of your regular meetings with regional health authority chairs. And then there's reference in paragraph 1, it's understood that Dame Betty Patterson, North West Thames Regional Health Authority, may raise the issue of timing of the introduction of handling charges for blood and blood products supplied to non-NHS hospitals, and then there's further information about that. Again, would it be right to understand that the reason you're being given a briefing on this occasion is, again, because you're going to have a meeting and it may come up in the meeting?
Yeah, probably.
So there's nothing more scientific than that in terms of why things may or may not come to you?
No, but it's a very good way of, I mean, in the way that I wanted to keep regional health chairman up to date. Obviously, the department were under instructions to keep me up to date. And if I went to a meeting which frankly was an open meeting for regional chairman, they could ask me, broadly speaking, anything they wanted to at different times. And so I needed to be briefed. On this private donor panel, there was never any prospect of a private donor panel getting off the ground. I think Jerry Vaughan had even had discouraged that. There was no way that I would actually have allowed that. And I don't know what our powers were, but if they weren't there, I would have taken them. I mean, the reason for that is that we had a brilliant voluntary giving service in blood donors, and we certainly weren't going to mess that about and mess it up because one company found certain difficulties and was even thinking of setting up a private donor panel. I don't know if that was intended as some sort of blackmail, but if it was spectacularly unsuccessful.
Now, I want to move now to consider your knowledge of and involvement in issues relating to AIDS in 1983. So we've looked at various matters that were coming to your attention in the course of 1983. If we now look at it through the perspective of AIDS, you say in your statement, so if we could have that back on screen, please, Seamus, paragraph 6.2, page 101. You say this: I am not able now to pinpoint exactly when I first became aware of AIDS as a newly identified disease. I had some knowledge of the new threat prior to the 1983 general election, but it should be remembered that in the early 1980s there were no certainties, and indeed there were different theories on what the cause of the disease was. My general recollection is that, learning from the experience of the United States, it steadily became evident that what became known as HIV could be spread in a number of ways, the most common being unprotected homosexual sex, while another was by injecting drug users sharing needles. Top of the next page. There was a reported incidence of AIDS amongst hemophiliacs, although the early case numbers were low in absolute terms. And then if we look at the next paragraph, you say, I've been asked how and when I first became aware of the American Food and Drug Administration March 1983 regulations regarding the collection of plasma from donors at increased risk of AIDS. From the available records, I've not seen any indication that the making of the American FDA regulations was reported to ministers at the time they were made. Therefore, I think it more likely I became aware of them when they were later referred to in ministerial submissions rather than being reported at the time to ministers, but I'm not able to pinpoint exactly when this occurred. I think your statement hasn't identified, and the inquiry hasn't identified, any particular documents relating to AIDS from the first half of 1983 in which matters are being brought to your attention. And I think in the absence of any documents, then you're not able to assist us with when you became aware of the possibility of AIDS being transmitted through blood products in the UK. Is that right?
I mean, I think you're right. I would need to check with the book I wrote on AIDS. I think you're right, but certainly most of the action was from 1985 onwards. I think in May 1983, I think we would have found Henry Yellowlees was still the chief medical officer. So I think it's highly likely that I wasn't very much involved in that, certainly not with him. And it's difficult, therefore, if you were not involved with the CMO on this, who exactly you would be involved with.
Well, the first documents that I think your statement identifies and that the inquiry has been able to identify as probably coming across your desk on this topic are in May of 1983. And so if we go to the documents, they've been looked at with other witnesses as well. If we could start, please, with DHSC 00011651. This is a minute of the 3rd of May of 1983. And it's, if we look at the bottom of the page, it says CC and Mr. Godber. Is that your private office?
Steve Godber, yep.
So it's copied to you, although it appears to be, it is primarily directed to Mr. Finsberg. And it refers to a briefing for the Prime Minister over the weekend, or on stories that had appeared in the press over the weekend. So if we just look at the text of it, you'll recall we were asked to provide briefing for Prime Minister's questions on the stories which appeared over the weekend about AIDS. I attach a copy of the line to take, which went to number 10, together with a background note written in supplementary question and answer form, both of which I'm circulating more widely within the office. And then there's reference to Mr. Finsberg meeting with the Haemophilia Society. If we go over the page, we can see the line to take which is the line that was drafted for the Prime Minister, as we understand it. I'm very concerned to read this weekend's press reports, can well understand the anxiety which some sensational reports may have caused. It's important to put this in perspective. There is as yet no conclusive proof that AIDS has been transmitted from American blood products. The risk that these products may transmit the disease must be balanced against the obvious risks to haemophiliacs of withdrawing a major source of supplies. And then there's reference to the surveillance system through the Communicable Disease Surveillance Centre. Now that's the first document that's been identified as referring to the, or using the formulation no conclusive proof.
Was that was a background note?
This was a draft line to take for the Prime Minister. She didn't in fact use those words in Parliament. There is then a background note which is at HSSG 0010056_035. And it's not a very clear document, but it's quite an important one, and I want to take it by stages, if I may. Just before we look at the detail of it, you say in your statement you can't be sure you saw these documents, but you think it likely you did, albeit because of the timings of Prime Minister's questions, you think it may have been that you saw them after Prime Minister's questions had taken place.
Rather odd that from memory, the date of what came to me was after the Prime Minister had given her answer, which was good for historic research, but wasn't much good for actually advising her on what she should say. But that appears to be the case. But from the dates that we've got on the records. But again, it's the deficiency of the papers, I suspect.
I think you say in your statements, I think it's likely that I would have seen this, but assuming I did so, it looks as though this would have been seen by me only after the Prime Minister's questions had already taken place. And then if we can just look together at this background paper, we can see it starts, what is AIDS? AIDS is a newly recognised syndrome which first became apparent in 1981. Symptoms, the disease comes on insidiously with non-specific symptoms, and examples are given, and there's usually a considerable delay. Sorry, can we zoom back into where we were, Shomik? And thank you. And there is usually a considerable delay between the occurrence of the first symptoms and the onset of the illness.
What year is this?
So this is May 1983.
Right, sorry, yes, of course.
And then we can see the question, who is at risk from AIDS? The disease occurred predominantly in homosexual males, but other groups such as mainline drug abusers, Haitian immigrants, and hemophiliacs requiring treatment with anti-hemophiliac factor concentrates have also been identified as being at increased risk. Is it caused by a virus? The cause of AIDS is unknown. Although medical opinion is tending to favour a virus as the agent responsible, there's no proof that this is the case. There's no means of testing. And then if we go further down to the paragraph beginning mortality, thank you. The mortality from the established disease is high. At least 40% of cases die after a variable period of months or years after contracting the disease. And then if we can go over the page, we just zoom in on the top paragraph. Is it transmitted in blood or blood products? As yet, there is no conclusive proof that AIDS is transmitted by blood as well as by homosexual contact, but the evidence is suggestive that this is likely to be the case. Yeah. The evidence relates to some 11 haemophiliacs in the USA, 3 in Spain, in whom the most likely explanation for the development of AIDS was their exposure to American factor VIII concentrates. There is also some evidence that AIDS has been transmitted to babies in blood transfusions. And then if we just go to the next paragraph, are there any cases of AIDS in UK haemophiliacs? As far as can be established, there are no proven cases of AIDS in UK haemophiliacs. There's a suspect case in Cardiff of whom we have details, but the reported in the Sunday Mail case in London has not yet been traced. And then there's more information given about the Cardiff case, with that paragraph concluding it's not possible to know whether British concentrate may contain the AIDS agent. Should a ban be placed on imports of US factor VIII concentrate? At present, haemophilia experts in this country take the view that to ban the imports of US factor VIII would be to place haemophiliacs at greater risk from bleeding than they would be from acquiring AIDS. And then there's a question about what action we are taking. I'll just stop there. I'll come back to what that section of it. But if we just go, we consider the first part of the document, the bits that I've read. Would this have been, as far as you can tell, to the extent that you're able to, the first substantive piece of information on AIDS that you'd received from the department?
I'm not sure it's the first, but it certainly was one of the most important, and probably the most important in that first period.
And so we can see it's telling the reader, haemophiliacs are at increased risk. There's an extremely high mortality rate. There are cases in the States, cases in Spain, blood transfusion cases, possible case in the UK.
Just take that up a bit, could you?
Yes.
I was just wondering if it was telling us all those things. Okay, we'll go on.
Pretty confident it was, Lord Fowler.
Okay.
Do you...
And it was also, and it was we are in an age of uncertainty here. I mean, it also poses the question, is it a virus? So this was in May 1983. Our knowledge was so insufficient that we were still asking whether it was a virus or not. So we can't be too certain on these things, wherever our sympathies may lie.
What would you expect the department to be doing with this information, this knowledge? Cases identified in Spain, cases identified in the States, possible case in the UK, no conclusive proof, but the evidence suggestive that it's transmitted by blood, haemophiliacs identified as being an increased risk. Are there particular steps or further investigations you'd expect the department to be undertaking, given that it has this information as at May of '83?
I would expect them to be getting as much information on this as they possibly could do on the basis of that. The only question, it seems to me, the only question is what you should say to the public on it, or what you should say to the medical profession, for that matter, on it. But I mean, on the question of what officials should be doing, they should be getting as much information as they can. Because remember that we were talking here about a relatively small number of cases, which we're talking about in May 1983. But so any information that we could get would be totally valuable as far as the department was concerned.
And if we just go to the second page, and we look at the paragraph, should a ban be placed, it's just over halfway down the page, Shomik. Should a ban be placed on imports of US factor VIII concentrate? And the information that's set out in this background paper is, at present, haemophilia experts in this country take the view that to ban the imports of US factor VIII would be to place haemophiliacs at greater risk from bleeding than they would be from acquiring AIDS. Now, looking at this, would you expect, by the reference to haemophilia experts, would you expect that the department had been in contact with a range of haemophilia experts to get their input?
Either that, or they just read in the journals the view. I mean, what happened there, if I can get I may have the dates a little wrong on this, but Dr. Galbraith proposed that there should be a stop on imports. And Dr. Walford said that this was premature and took no account of any other effects that such a ban might have. And therefore, there was a movement in July 1983 to, if you like, a collective consideration by the subcommittee of the Committee for the Safety of Medicines. I think Galbraith was in fact invited to that. And I think that the consensus view of the committee was that the risk of bleeding at this stage, we are talking about May 1983, was greater. So they were making, as we all were, they were making judgment in the face of uncertainty. There was great uncertainty about AIDS and its cause. I mean, we couldn't even say it was a virus. I mean, we were in terrible trouble. And they took the view that it would be, there was more risk from bleeding than there was, greater risk of bleeding if we actually stopped imports altogether. This again, one needs to emphasise this is May 1983 that we're talking about. So quite early on.
We'll come on to Dr. Galbraith and the Committee on the Safety of Medicines, but just taking it in stages. This is around the 3rd or 4th of May of 1983. It is, in fact, before Dr. Galbraith has written his letter to the department. If it were the case, and this may be a matter of dispute, but if it were the case that the department was essentially relying upon a single haemophilia expert for advice, would that have been a matter of concern to you?
Well, if it was just a single, you're saying Dr. Walford was just a single?
No, I don't mean by that a reference to Dr. Walford at all, who wouldn't claim to be a haemophilia expert, I think.
But it was her advice that we were, you know, I'm maybe getting my dates mixed up, but not much mixed up. Dr. Walford was fairly outspoken on this, totally premature and something else, to have a ban. But I would have thought that that was the, I don't know, the consensus of haemophilia experts. But I do think that if there was, at this stage, I'm sorry to go on about this, but I think that had the CMO taken a grip of this thing now, then we might have had a better picture. But in all honesty, it was a pretty obscure picture in any event.
Just one further question on this paragraph that we were looking at. It might be said that haemophilia experts would be well placed to assess the risk of bleeding.
Yeah.
Were haemophilia experts, however, the clinicians best placed to assess the risks of acquiring AIDS? I can't answer that question. Fair enough. Perhaps we can just finish looking at this document before we break. If we then just go to what action we're taking.
Yep.
UK transfusion directors have already discussed the issues. It's considered impossible to ask donors if they're homosexual. However, they'll avoid wherever possible bleeding donors who are known to be homosexual, and an approach may be made to the leaders of the homosexual groups to request that for the present practicing male homosexuals should abstain from donating. Now, just pausing there, and we'll come on to steps that were subsequently taken in relation to leaflets and so on. But that's a pretty limited piece of action, is it not? Avoiding donors who are known to be homosexual, because it may be rather difficult for regional transfusion directors or those working in transfusion centres to know the sexuality of the donors who are coming to give blood.
Well, yes, it is, I suppose. But as I understand this paragraph, they will avoid wherever possible bleeding donors who are known to be homosexual. An approach may be made to the leaders of the homosexual groups to request that for the present, practicing male homosexuals should abstain from donating. I mean, that is quite a step, because what you're saying is, you're not saying they're practicing male homosexuals with a number of partners should abstain. You're saying all male homosexuals should abstain from donating, even those who have long-standing relationships over many years. Now, as it happened, that became the policy, per force of circumstance, really. But I don't think anyone should say that that was anything other than a kind of quite radical step, and one which I suspect at the time many in the gay community would have regarded as highly questionable.
And then if we look at the second action identified, it's haemophilia centre directors reporting any suspect cases of AIDS. And then if we go over the page, top of the page, The third item is Blood Transfusion Research Committee of the Central Blood Laboratories Authority will be considering the problems posed by AIDS to the blood transfusion service. So in terms of the position of haemophiliacs, there's nothing here identified, is there, other than suspect cases will be reported by haemophilia centre directors?
Yeah.
Would you expect there to have been more being investigated at this stage as to whether there should be information given to haemophiliacs or information given to clinicians?
I mean, again, you see, you come up against the problem, and I'm not sure that, you know, our fund of background information is very complete on all this in any event. But you come up against the problem that our knowledge is so restricted. So before you start giving information out, you need to know, I think, a little more. I mean, I go back to the point, if you can't tell us whether it's a virus or not, it is quite difficult to send out conclusive advice on the position. And that was the position then. You know, I'm afraid we were making policy at that stage. It fortunately changed, but at that stage we were making policy through a slight fog.
Is this background paper, the information gathered together and contained within this, something that should at least have been ringing alarm bells within the department, that this was something they needed to find out as much as they can about, keep completely up to date?
Yes, I think that's right. And I think it should have been ringing alarm bells more widely than that. I think it was actually beginning to ring alarm bells, perhaps not as loudly as it could have been.
And this is something that the Chief Medical Officer should have been very closely involved with indeed.
Well, I think I hesitate to kind of keep on mentioning the CMO at that stage, but let me put it this way. I think that if Donald Atchison had been Chief Medical Officer then and not a couple of years later, I think more action would have been taken.
Well, I may need to pick that up with you because Donald Atchison did become Chief Medical Officer only a few months later.
Yeah.
We can pick that up at a later stage. So I note the time.
Yes. Well, shall we take a break now and come back at 5 minutes to 4?
Yes, can I just check whether Lord Fowler's happy to carry on for the rest of the afternoon? Or?
Yes. I'm very happy to stop now and come back tomorrow morning if you prefer that. It's entirely...
How much longer have we to go?
Well, we'd probably go on till 4:30, I imagine. So about...
So you'll be coming back for about 35 minutes?
Let's do that.
Okay. So 5 to 4.